I used to believe that family meant safety, that no matter how complicated things got, there were lines people simply wouldn't cross. I was wrong, because the day my daughter-in-law walked into my cabin in Aspen and said, "We're taking over this place," I realized something chilling. She had never seen me as family at all. The cabin was never meant to be a statement. It wasn't some grand display of wealth or a trophy property to impress anyone. It was quiet, tucked between tall pine trees, with a view that looked like it belonged in a painting. Snow-dusted mountains, a frozen lake in the distance, and silence so pure it almost felt sacred. I bought it after my husband passed. After 40 years of marriage, the house we had built together suddenly felt too large, too empty, too full of echoes. Every room reminded me of him. Every corner held a memory that didn't know where to go anymore. So I left. Aspen gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Space to breathe, space to grieve without people watching, without being told to stay strong. For a while, it was just me and peace, until my son Daniel started visiting. At first, it felt right. He'd bring groceries, fix small things around the cabin, sit with me by the fireplace like he used to when he was younger. I thought maybe, in some quiet way, we were rebuilding something. Then he brought her, Vanessa. She walked in like she was inspecting a hotel suite she might not approve of. Her eyes didn't settle. They scanned the furniture, the walls, the view, me. "Oh," she said, smiling thinly. "This is cozy." It wasn't the word. It was the pause before it. I noticed things about her quickly. The way she spoke in compliments that didn't quite feel like compliments. The way she laughed a little too loudly when something wasn't funny. The way she always seemed to be calculating something behind her eyes. Still, I tried. For Daniel, we had dinners. I cooked her favorite meals. Though she rarely said thank you, she'd sit across from me, scrolling through her phone, occasionally looking up to comment on how different my lifestyle was. "You really like being out here alone?" she once asked. "I don't feel alone," I told her. She smiled again, that same smile. "I guess some people get used to less." I didn't respond, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I was starting to understand something about her. She needed reactions, and I wasn't going to give her one. Things shifted slowly after that. Daniel started visiting less on his own. It was always the two of them now. And Vanessa, she got more comfortable. Too comfortable. She'd open cabinets without asking, rearrange things in the kitchen. Once, I came back from a walk to find her moving furniture in the living room. "This layout just makes more sense," she said, as if it were her decision to make. I stood there for a moment, watching her. "This is my home," I said calmly. She didn't even look embarrassed. "Of course," she replied lightly. "I'm just helping." Helping. That word stayed with me, because nothing she did ever felt like help. It felt like preparation. The real tension began a few weeks later. Daniel called me one evening, his voice unusually careful. "Mom, we've been thinking," he said, "about the future." Something in my chest tightened. "All right. Well, Vanessa and we want to settle somewhere more peaceful, away from the city." I didn't say anything. I already knew where this was going. "And your place," he continued. "It's perfect." There it was. I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to feel it. "Daniel," I said gently, "this home isn't an investment property. It's not temporary." "I know that," he said quickly. "We're not saying you should leave or anything like that. Just, maybe we could all live together. For a while. For a while." The kind of phrase that sounds harmless, until you realize it has no end. "And Vanessa?" I asked. He hesitated. "Well, she thinks it would be good for everyone." Of course she did. They arrived unannounced 2 days later. I remember the sound of the car first. Tires crunching against the snow. Then the doors slamming. Fast. Decisive. I hadn't even made it to the front door before it burst open. Vanessa walked in like she owned the place. No greeting, no hesitation. Just energy. Sharp, impatient energy. "We're taking over this place," she announced, her voice echoing through the cabin. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard her. Daniel stood behind her, not meeting my eyes. "What did you just say?" I asked, quietly. She stepped further inside, looking around like she was already imagining changes. "It's time to make this practical," she said. "This house is too much for one person. We need the space, and honestly, it just makes sense." "Makes sense." I looked at my son. "Daniel?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, let's just talk about it." But Vanessa didn't want to talk. She walked straight toward the living room, then stopped, completely stopped. Her posture changed first, then her expression. The confidence, the certainty. It drained from her face so quickly it almost didn't feel real. She went pale, not annoyed, not offended. Pale, like she had just seen something she wasn't supposed to see. My heart skipped, because whatever had just happened. I hadn't planned it, and I had no idea what she was looking at. I turned slowly toward the same direction, and in that moment, everything shifted. I turned slowly toward the living room, and for a brief second, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The same soft gray couch, the same woven blanket draped neatly over the armrest, the same low wooden table Daniel had helped me sand and polish just a few months earlier. Everything looked exactly the way it always had, but Vanessa didn't move. Her eyes were locked on something just beyond the obvious. Her breathing had changed too, shallow, uneven. "Vanessa," I said, my voice steady but quieter now. "What is it?" She didn't answer. Daniel stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. "What's wrong?" Still nothing. Then, slowly, almost mechanically, she lifted her hand and pointed. What is that?" she whispered. I followed her finger, and that's when I saw it. Not something new, but something I had almost forgotten was even there. A small framed photograph sitting on the far corner shelf. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't even particularly noticeable, unless you were looking closely. Most people missed it entirely, but Vanessa hadn't. The photo was old, slightly faded around the edges. It showed me and my husband standing in front of this very cabin, years before it had ever been renovated. Back when it was different, back when we were different. But that wasn't what had caught her attention. It was what was written beneath it. A small brass plate, fixed to the frame. Simple, clean, unmistakable. Property held in irrevocable family trust. Primary beneficiary, Eleanor Hayes. Secondary conditions apply. Vanessa's face lost even more color. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling now. "You told me." I didn't know it was finalized," he stammered. I didn't speak immediately. I just watched them, watched the shift happen in real time, because now suddenly this wasn't about space or family or practical decisions anymore. This was about something else entirely, something far more calculated. "I think," I said calmly, stepping closer, "we should all sit down." Vanessa didn't move. "Now," I added, just a touch firmer. That did it. She lowered her hand slowly, her eyes still flicking back to the frame, as if it might disappear if she looked away for too long. We sat around the table, the same table where I had cooked for her, where I had tried, patiently, quietly, to make her feel welcome. The irony wasn't lost on me. "You want to explain this?" Vanessa said, her tone sharper now, though there was something underneath it, something less controlled. Fear. I folded my hands gently in front of me. "There's nothing complicated about it," I said. "The cabin is legally protected. It's part of a trust." Daniel looked confused. "Mom, you never mentioned a trust." "No," I replied. "I didn't." "Why not?" he asked. I held his gaze for a moment. "Because I wasn't sure it mattered," I said. "Until recently." Vanessa let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh, it matters now." "Yes," I said quietly. "I can see that." The truth was, I hadn't created the trust because of Vanessa, not at first. I created it because of something my husband used to say. "Don't just leave things behind," he would tell me. "Leave them protected." At the time, I thought he meant financially, but after he passed, I started to understand what he really meant. Protection wasn't just about money. It was about intention, about making sure the things you built, the life you created, didn't end up in the hands of people who didn't value them, or worse, people who saw them as opportunities. So, I made a decision, quietly, carefully. I met with a lawyer in Aspen. We went over everything, the cabin, my savings, even some smaller assets I hadn't thought much about before. And I placed the cabin into an irrevocable trust, one that couldn't be altered, couldn't be claimed, couldn't be taken over, not by anyone, not even family, unless certain conditions were met, conditions that went far beyond simply wanting it. "What kind of conditions?" Vanessa asked, her eyes narrowing. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see confidence or control or calculation. I saw uncertainty, the kind that require patience, I said. "Respect, consistency," she scoffed. "That's vague." "It's intentional," I replied. Daniel leaned forward. "Mom, are you saying we can't ever live here?" "I'm saying," I answered gently, "that this home isn't something you move into because it's convenient." "It's not about convenience," Vanessa snapped. "It's about building a future." "No," I said, my voice still calm but firmer now. "It's about control." Silence. Heavy, unavoidable silence. Vanessa's composure cracked first. "This is ridiculous," she said, standing abruptly. "You're holding this over us like some kind of test." "I'm not holding anything over you," I replied. "I'm simply not handing it to you." "That's the same thing." "No," I said, "it isn't." She opened her mouth to argue again, but Daniel spoke first. "Vanessa, wait." She turned to him, frustration flashing across her face. "What?" He hesitated. Then, slowly, he looked at me, and for the first time since he had walked through that door, he really looked at me. Not as an obstacle, not as a solution, but as his mother. "Mom," he said quietly, "did you think we were trying to take advantage of you?" The question hung in the air. I could have softened it, could have reassured him, made it easier, but that wouldn't have been honest. Yes, I said. Vanessa let out a sharp breath. Unbelievable. But Daniel didn't react the way she expected. He didn't get defensive. He didn't argue. He just sat back, processing. Because somewhere deep down, he already knew. He had seen the signs too. He just hadn't wanted to admit what they meant. I didn't raise you to think like that, I continued gently. And for a long time, I believed you didn't. He swallowed hard. I don't, he said, though the words sounded uncertain now. I nodded. I know, I said, but intentions matter less than actions, Daniel. And lately, your actions haven't felt like yours. That landed. Hard. Vanessa crossed her arms. So what, we're just supposed to walk away? No, I said. You're supposed to understand. Understand what? That this, I gestured around the cabin, isn't just a place. It's a life, a history, a boundary. She shook her head. You're making this emotional on purpose. Of course I am, I replied, because it is emotional. For a moment no one spoke. Then Daniel stood, not abruptly, not defensively, just decisively. I think we should go, he said quietly. Vanessa turned to him, stunned. Excuse me? We need to think, he continued. Both of us. This is insane, she muttered. But he didn't argue with her, didn't try to convince her. He simply walked toward the door, and after a moment, reluctant, frustrated, but with nowhere else to direct it, she followed. They didn't say goodbye. The door closed behind them with a dull, final sound, and just like that, the cabin was quiet again. I stood there for a long time after they left, not moving, not thinking, just feeling. Because despite everything, despite the tension, the confrontation, the truth that had finally surfaced, there was still a part of me that ached, not for the cabin, but for my son. He came back 3 days later, alone. This time he knocked. I opened the door slowly, and there he was. Not the confident man trying to negotiate a future, not the silent figure standing behind someone else's words. Just Daniel, my son. I'm sorry, he said. No explanation, no justification, just that. And somehow, it was enough to start. We sat by the fireplace that evening, like we used to, and for the first time in a long while, we talked honestly, about everything, about Vanessa, about the pressure he hadn't realized he was under, about the way small compromises had slowly turned into bigger ones, until he wasn't sure where his own voice had gone. I didn't see it clearly, he admitted. Not until you said it. I nodded. Sometimes clarity doesn't come gently, I said. He didn't move into the cabin. He didn't ask again. And over time, things changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily. He started visiting on his own again. Less frequently at first, then more naturally. The tension faded. Trust slowly rebuilt. As for Vanessa, she never came back. Not to the cabin, not into my life, and eventually, not into Daniel's either. The cabin remained what it was always meant to be. A place of quiet, of reflection, of truth. But now, it held something else too, a reminder that boundaries aren't acts of rejection, they're acts of protection. And sometimes, the people who react the strongest to them are the ones who needed them the most. I used to think family meant never having to say no. Now I understand something far more important. Sometimes, the strongest way to protect a relationship is by refusing to let it become something it was never meant to be.